we're going to be talking about nuclear energy and the kinds of things that could happen with an atomic emergency. And we do this not to worry you, but or frighten you, but really, we've got to admit we live in an atomic age. There is an atomic bomb, so we have to be aware of this.
No matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Here's Tony going to his Cub Scout meeting. Tony knows the bomb can explode any time of the year, day or night. Duck and cover. Atta boy, Tony. That flash means act fast.
When I was a child, I remember how safe we were supposed to feel after watching those propaganda films. There was always a great deal of justification around our use of the atomic bomb. It was as if we had a God-given right to put together some of the world's smartest scientists for one sole purpose: to create a weapon so powerful that no one would ever want to mess with us again. Some said, and still say, if we didn't move quickly on this, somebody else would have beat us to the punch. And besides, dropping a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki resulted in saving more lives than it destroyed. Or so they said. I guess that sort of rationale was supposed to make us all feel more secure about something that had so radically altered every aspect of life on this planet. It was the start of a race that has had no finish line. Arsenals of hydrogen and nuclear bombs and radioactive waste sites continue to grow with no end in sight. New Mexico is where it all began. Nestled high in the beautiful Jemez Mountains, Los Alamos was chosen as the site for the Manhattan Project, partly because of its remoteness. Some have called this place the land of clear light, and it's here where we created a light so bright that its shadows will never disappear.
We not only have Los Alamos National Laboratory in this state, but we also have Sandia National Laboratory just outside of Albuquerque. And then in the southern part of the state, we have a waste isolation pilot plant, which has just recently become the first operating dump for military radioactive waste.
Carved in rock centuries ago along the H.O.P.E cliffs near Bandelier National Monument, Avanyu, the protector and controller of water, looks out towards the pueblos that sit below, downwind and downstream from Los Alamos National Laboratory. The serpent emerges with fierce determination from the heart of their mountain.
I was about 6 or 7 years old, and my father had taken us for a drive up to the hill, and I remember seeing this large gate that went clear across the road. There was this tower, and with guys standing up there with machine guns, and I wasn't really scared, only that it was a time that I was born into.
what grew out of the Manhattan Project and the Cold War that followed are research and weapons facilities so powerful that hundreds of thousands of acres of land that had once belonged to local communities have been consumed in the interest of national security. It has also created a new economy that has forever changed the livelihoods of traditional peoples in northern New Mexico.
Our people used to be farmers, and they farmed before Los Alamos came into being. Just as soon as Los Alamos came into being, they quit farming. They don't do any more farming.
Radiation. This is the one new effect obtained by the use of an atomic weapon. If you receive enough gamma radiation to cause sterility or severe sickness, you'll be killed by blast, flying debris, or heat anyway. Well, that's the story. Don't worry about yourselves. As far as the test is concerned, you'll be okay.
10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
No one really knew much about radiation at the beginning of the atomic age, except for the fact that many thousands of Japanese civilians died horrible deaths from radiation exposure after the dropping of the bombs. Even to this day, thousands continue to suffer from the fallout. Sadly enough, perhaps the more fortunate ones were those who were incinerated instantly. Back home in the United States, in places like the Nevada test site, soldiers and civilians became guinea pigs for above-ground atomic and nuclear bomb tests and secret medical experiments during the 50s and 60s. They had no clue about the dangers.
Did you keep your mouth shut, or did you get a mouthful of dirt?
I got a mouthful and a face full of dirt.
We've learned a lot since then.
There are 3,000 diseases caused by damaged genes that we know of. And by increasing a background level of radiation in the environment, sort of radiation that's made by nuclear power plants or made when you make weapons, like strontium-90 and cesium-137, that actually get into the food. For instance, at 3 Mile Island, a lot of strontium-90 and cesium got out and it landed on the soil, and the grass says, "Ooh, calcium," and it takes it up in its roots and concentrates it thousands of times. Then the cattle come and eat the grass, the cows, and the breast or the udder of the cow says, "Oh, calcium, we need that for the milk." So it concentrates it thousands more times in the milk, and then it goes to the chocolate factory. Then the pregnant woman drinks the milk or eats the chocolate, and it's concentrated thousands more times in the human breast. Then the baby drinks the milk. So it's called bioconcentration, concentration of orders of magnitude at each step of the food chain. Babies are 10 to 20 times more sensitive to radiation than adults because their cells are actively dividing, and it's when the cells are dividing and the genes are being replicated that they're so sensitive to the effects of radiation. So what I'm saying to you is, as we increase the amount of radiation in the background radiation in our food and water, so we're going to increase the incidence of genetic diseases forevermore.
There's an ongoing debate about what are safe and acceptable levels of radiation. Truth is, there is no safe level. It accumulates in our bodies and in the environment around us.
There's a number of health standards that governments have improvised over the years because they recognize radiation is dangerous to human health. It's unfortunate that in the early days of the nuclear industry here in the United States, especially at Los Alamos, that things were pretty sloppy up there. I mean, they were just throwing stuff down the canyons and burying it wherever, and, you know, out of sight, out of mind type thing. Part of the problem in the United States, though, is that these standards vary from agency to agency. For instance, the Environmental Protection Agency may have one standard. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission may have another standard. And then to further confuse the issue, countries in Europe, for instance, have stricter standards. And again, where they're coming from is they feel there's a lot of unknowns about radiation, so they're being more conservative. Rather than take a chance, they're going to implement stricter standards.
Uranium is one of the key ingredients in the making of nuclear weapons. Its veins run through the lands of the Navajo Nation and the Buna Pueblo. Along what is called the Grants Uranium Belt, men and women were hired to mine this powerful and highly radioactive mineral. It was in the air that they breathed, in the water that they drank, and of course it entered their bloodstreams.
On the reservation mine, the government claimed that it was dry ore mining, which is not true. When I worked in the mine, we put the can under the dripping water, and then we drank that whenever we got thirsty during our work schedule. And some of the people that live right near the mine, they were the ones who took the water home and cook and wash and do whatever they needed to do with it and use it for their person and their family members.
We had questioned how these conditions start to develop. In my case, my husband had some sores that started to appear on his fingers, and it just went on into his system.
Many scientists and technicians who are part of the community have worked at the labs for many years and have also been exposed, along with the surrounding canyons, the streams, and the meadows.
So many of my friends that I grew up with and worked with over the many years up there are dying in their middle 60s, early 60s. I can just name a dozen of them just off the top of my head. We've got a big problem up there. I don't think we should have to wait till we lay down and die before something is done.
There seems to have been very little concern early on with impacts beyond the workplace. For many years, acid waste was discharged into the upper reaches of Pueblo Canyon, now known as Acid Canyon. Those who grew up there remember hiking and riding bicycles through Acid Canyon almost every day, and now some of them have very serious health concerns. These incidents have been covered up, hidden from the public at large. Little is really known about the specific locations of these disposal sites, mainly because, in fact, the lab kept incomplete records and, in some cases, no documentation at all. Recent forest fires that burned throughout Los Alamos, including some areas of the lab itself, have many people worried about new releases of radioactive and toxic wastes.
It's been recently discovered that there's been high explosives contamination down in deep groundwater, down to the depth of around 1,400 feet. This level of contamination is above EPA health advisory levels. Many of the canyons here in Los Alamos are contaminated as a result of historic production and research and development. There's a large liquid waste treatment facility here that's been dumping enormous amounts of gallons into Mortondad Canyon for over 30 years. And in Mortondad Canyon, we find a lot of tritium contamination, contamination from hazardous materials such as nitrates and the like. There's also historically quite a bit of plutonium contamination in Los Alamos Canyon from an old liquid waste facility that was operating from the late 40s to the mid 50s. So there's a pretty high degree of contamination here. DOE, in its rush to claim cleanup throughout the nuclear weapons complex, will really move only a small proportion of waste down in the southern part of the state to WIP and leave most waste still buried, essentially unremediated here at Los Alamos. DOE has explicitly stated that it plans on leaving 85% of all waste just simply buried, in some cases capped. Now, given our canyon and mesa topography and the fact that we have dramatic weather events which create quite a bit of stormwater runoff, the ultimate effect is that if not cleaned up, many of these contaminants can end up in our primary watershed, that being the Rio Grande.
According to the Department of Energy, if our radioactive waste was spread across a football field, it would rise about 4 miles high. Astonishingly, this is waste that continues to accumulate at an alarming rate because of the current and continuing creation of nuclear weapons.
The Stockpile Stewardship Program expressly provides for the possibility of new nuclear weapons designs. Nuclear weapons should be largely a thing of the past. Military planners know that they can't really use them. So hence the state is dependent on what is largely an obsolete industry.
Under the veil of secrecy, i.e. national security, the lab has traditionally positioned itself as the keeper of information that supposedly protected our interest as a democracy. But that veil also covered up harmful activities, and we are only now beginning to understand the magnitude of their impact on our world.
A culture, not that individuals are all like this, but a culture that fosters a lack of intellectual humility. That these are the cream of the crop, the smartest scientists ever produced by man. And this opens the door to an abuse of power. That if you think you are so smart, you don't have to be accountable to anybody. And I'm not pointing my finger at any individual people, but that culture of the superiority of intelligence, compounded with the Cold War mentality that we have to keep everything top secret and everything shrouded in secrecy, combines to make an institution that refuses or has historically refused to be held accountable to the public.
In 1994, Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety, a public activist group in New Mexico, filed a lawsuit against Los Alamos National Laboratory for suspected violations of the Clean Air Act. This effort was made possible by the decision of a lab employee who decided to blow the whistle.
The lab then was interested in trying to settle the case with Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. And the lab came into the settlement discussions and publicly said they wanted to settle, and then put out a press release that said that they were now in full compliance with the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act is the federal law that requires that the laboratory monitor all of its radioactive air emissions. The lab said, we're now in full compliance. Joe Gutierrez read the newspaper, because it came out the next day. Lab says they're in compliance, and he knew that that wasn't true, because Joe was a quality assurance auditor, and Joe had done a number of audits of all these different lab functions that made him certain that they in fact were not, they still were not monitoring the air as they should have. And Joe went to Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. Joe came to me and went public with that information.
When the issue about the Clean Air Act came about, what really bothered me was that, well, it no longer was just an individual, but the public at large. And the disregard for the concern of the general public at large, and particularly my family lives in the surrounding area as well. And again, I'm not trying to personalize it. There are just other people in general. We have a large population in the immediate surrounding area that were going to get affected or potentially affected. So that bothered me. And those are the behaviors that really led me that required me, and I use that word purposely, it required me to speak out.
As part of the settlement between Los Alamos Lab and Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety, an independent audit team was hired to review the lab and its non-compliance with the Clean Air Act.
The bottom line of what we found was that the laboratory was not in compliance with the regulation. And one of the key reasons for this was that it's required in the regulation that you be able to report what your releases of material are to the environment so that you can transport this material, calculate the dose and the risk. And what we couldn't do was to trace back to the original source, back to these laboratories where this material was, exactly how much was there and exactly what kind of material it was, because there was a gap in the records. We knew that the materials were in the laboratory at some point, and then all we had to go by was sort of an inventory sheet that came up at the end of the year, but we couldn't trace how that inventory sheet was derived. Now, to me, as an auditor, you've got to be able to show me that.
By its very nature, Los Alamos Lab has not been open to public debate concerning its policies or activities. It has historically acted under top secrecy. However, only recently have activists been successful in bringing about more accountability and public scrutiny.
In the first place, the regulation is written to protect the public. And never before have the citizens been involved in checking this compliance themselves, getting involved in the compliance process. If I were a citizen, I would want to be involved. I would want to know how the doses are calculated. I would want to go there and in some cases check the doses myself. And I would expect the facility creating the risk to invite me in to do that.
The lab is too powerful, the issues are too big, and we're too small to make a difference. These are some of the reasons why we don't take action, and some of the fears that paralyze us into complacency. You know, let someone else do it. But what happens when somebody else does do it? What is it that drives others to stand up, to speak out?
ニューメキシコと長崎、遠く離れていても平和を求める心は一つ。共に頑張りましょう。
Although New Mexico and Nagasaki are thousands of miles away, we are all united in our wish and commitment for peace. Let us unite and work together for a bright future. Thank you very much.
We live in a time when the reality of community reaches far beyond our traditional boundaries.
What's the lab?
The continued presence of nuclear weapons in today's world and the Cold War mentality that supports their presence creates a false sense of security, as if there still could be a winner in a nuclear war, as if these inconceivably destructive weapons are safe if we use them intelligently, or if we only use them as deterrents. We must challenge these notions. This requires dialogue, action, standing up to those institutions that threaten the well-being, indeed the very existence of generations to come. Because the bottom line is, nuclear weapons foreclose any future.
Sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Abolish nuclear weapons. Stop.
How do you feel, about Los Alamos being in our sacred mountain? What I try to do is to bring in facts about the Los Alamos, facts about what radiation does, to our health, and hoping, that we can make educated decisions on what we should do from here on out.
we're talking about nuclear-free reservation, and that's what I think we need to do on the Navajo, so that there's no future mining, or that there's no waste being transported across our nation or close to our reservation.
There's many of us that are younger workers up there who are not sick today, but we don't know about tomorrow.
The only way to get change is to mobilise millions of people in democracy. That's the only way change occurs. And as someone said last century, the only way evil flourishes is for good people to do nothing, like the Germans. Yeah, we saw those cattle trucks. Yeah, well, we didn't know it was in them. Yeah, well, we saw the smoke coming out of the chimney. It smelt sort of sweet and funny, but we didn't know what it was. Yeah, well, we know Los Alamos is here. Yeah, we've lived here. Yeah, I don't really know what they do up there, but I think it's a bit scary. Yeah, well, we see some stuff coming out of the stack sometimes. It's probably radioactive.
This fight comes out of love, and this fight comes out of trying to make this place where I live, this beautiful place, a better place, and a more humane place, and a healthier place for us all. And if the fight ever becomes about hate, we've already lost.